Good morning, everybody. Today we are learning lesson 9-2, isosceles and equilateral triangles. You probably have seen isosceles and equilateral triangles in the past, and therefore let's review what they are again. Well, the first triangle that we're going to look at is something called isosceles triangle. And in the past, you have learned that isosceles triangle is a triangle in which two sides, any of the two sides, are equal. In this case, to make sure that you know which two sides are equal, we use these tick marks to indicate that this side, segment AB or side AB, is congruent or have the same length as the side BC or segment BC. So in an isosceles triangle, to name that these two segments or these two sides are congruent, we're going to write segment AB, okay, segment AB is congruent to segment CB, okay? And you're more than welcome to swap these two letters. So for example, if you were to write segment BA is congruent to segment BC, that works too. And only these two sides are congruent, and this side will be different or is different length compared to these two sides. Otherwise, it'll be an equilateral triangle, which we're looking at next. So in an equilateral triangle, all three sides are congruent. So in this case, side SK or segment SK is congruent to side KN or segment KN, which is also congruent to side NS or segment NS. So in this case, we're going to write segment SK is congruent to segment KN, which is also congruent to segment NS. All three sides are congruent. And later you learn that in equilateral triangles, all the angles are the same as well, which we'll take a look at that later. The last thing that you're going to learn is something called vertical angles. And this is not a type of triangle. This is just an angle, a pair of angles. In vertical angles, they open in opposite directions. Angles are open in opposite directions. So in this case, we're going to say that these two angles, angle AOM and angle TOU, are congruent angles, and they're also vertical angles. So in this case, it's going to be angle AOM and angle TOU. And in the past, you also have learned that vertical angles are always congruent. So we're going to put a congruent sign in the middle. For example, if this angle is 30 degrees, then this angle is also 30 degrees. And likewise, doesn't have to be left and right. It could be top or bottom. So for example, angle AOT is also congruent to angle MOU. And these two angles are also vertical angles. So you have two pairs of vertical angles. One pair in red ink, and then another pair in black ink. So another way for you to write a pair of vertical angles being congruent in this diagram will be angle AOT is congruent to angle MOU, okay? So that's all the review with isosceles triangle, equilateral triangle, and vertical angles. And now we're moving on to the lesson. In lesson 9-2, the title is called Isosceles and Equilateral Triangles. And we're going to take a look at some properties of isosceles triangle first, and we're going to apply the properties to solve problems involving isosceles triangle. So the first thing that you need to know about isosceles triangle is something called the isosceles triangle theorem. It says that if two sides of a triangle are congruent, then the angles opposite those sides are congruent as well. So if these two sides, AB and BC, are congruent, then their base angle, angle A, and angle C, or in this case, ACB, is congruent to angle BAC. So if these two sides are congruent, so are these two angles. The converse is the same, meaning the reverse of the statement is also true. It says that if two angles of a triangle are congruent, then the sides opposite those angles are congruent. So in this case, if you're given that these two angles, angle BAC and angle BCA, are congruent, that means so are these two sides, side AB and side BC. So if you have two angles being congruent, then their opposite sides are also congruent. So it goes both ways. Let's take a look at example 1. In example 1, you're given this triangle. We're going to name it triangle ABC. And it tells you that if angle B is 81 degrees, what is measure of angle C and measure of angle A? So let's first label that the measure of angle B is 81 degrees. So we know that this is 81. And we're going to use the theorem that, well, remember, if these two sides of the triangle are congruent, so are the base angle. So that means that we know that the measure of angle C is going to be 81 degrees, okay? Because these two angles are the same. Now, to find measure of angle A, now measure of angle A is not necessarily 81 degrees because it's an isosceles triangle, so this angle might be different. But remember back in the days you learned that these three angles in a triangle, they add up to 180 degrees. So therefore, to find the measure of angle A, you're just going to have 180 degrees, subtract angle B, which is 81, and then subtract angle C, which is another 81 degrees. So if you were to use a calculator, you're just going to do 180, subtract 81, and subtract another 81, and you'll get 18 degrees. So that means the measure of angle A is 18 degrees. So measure of angle C is 81 degrees, and measure of angle A is 18 degrees. In example 1b, you're also given this diagram and it asks you to find the value of x. So to start, we're going to look at the triangle that has the most information, which is the triangle on the top, because it says this is 65 degrees. So if this is 65 degrees and these two sides are congruent, that means their angles opposite to them are also congruent, so that we know that this is 65 degrees. Well, to find this angle, just like example 1a, we're going to use 180 degrees subtract these two. So for this angle, you're going to use 180 subtract 65 subtract another 65. So we're going to use a calculator. So you do 180 subtract 65 times 2, which is 50 degrees. Okay? So that means this angle is 50 degrees. Then after that, now you're getting closer and closer to x now. You see that we're approaching from top to bottom, getting closer and closer to x. Now let's take a look at this angle. Remember, these two angles, in the past that you learned that they are vertical angles, and vertical angles are congruent. So if this is 50 degrees, that means this is also 50 degrees, okay? So let's move on to the bottom triangle. We notice that it's an isosceles triangle. And if these two sides are congruent, so are the opposite angles. So if this is 50 degrees, this is also 50 degrees. And lastly, to find x, I know that in this triangle, the three angles add up to 180 degrees. So you just do 180, subtract 50, subtract 50. So to find x, you do 180, subtract 50, subtract another 50, and you get 80 degrees. That means the value of x is 80 degrees. In example 2a, there's a word problem. Let's take a look at that. It says the length of the base of an isosceles triangle is x, and the length of a leg is 6x minus 4. And it says the perimeter of the triangle is 226, and they want you to find x. So let's draw out the diagram. So it says an isosceles triangle, so you could just draw any isosceles triangle, okay? And we're just gonna label two of the sides being the same. It says the base, it's x. So since this is the base, we're gonna say this is x. And then it says the leg is 6x minus 4, and which is gonna be the same on both sides here. So 6x minus 4 and 6x minus 4. And the perimeter just means that all three sides add up is 226 units. That means we could set up an equation that could help us to solve for x. So to do that, we're going to add up all the sides. So you have 6x minus 4 plus another 6x minus 4, and plus the last side, which is x, is equal to 226. And I'm just going to draw a divider so that way you know this is the left side. That's part of the work that you need to show. So we add up all three sides, 6x minus 4, 6x minus 4, and x, and that becomes the perimeter, which is 226. Well, to solve for x, we're going to combine like terms. So 6x plus 6x plus x is 13x, and then negative 4 minus another 4 is minus 8 is equal to 226. To continue to solve this equation, we're going to isolate the variable by adding 8 on both sides, like this, so that the negative 8 and 8 cancel. and you're left with 13x is equal to 226 plus 8. That would get you 234. To find out 13 times what number is 234, we're going to divide both sides by 13. So you're going to calculate what is 234 divided by 13, and using a calculator, you get that your x is equal to 18. And that is the value for x. Now to double check whether your answer is correct, very easy. All you have to do is plug in 18 back to the variable on each side. So 6 times 18 minus 4, if I were to use a calculator, is 104. So if I were to plug in x, it's 104, and so this is 1. And remember, x is 18. So if you were to add up all these three sides, do you really get 226? Let's confirm. So I'm going to do 104 plus 104 plus 18, and you do get 226. And that's how you know that your x that you found is correct. We're going to continue this lesson with another type of triangle. And here we have something called equilateral triangle. And these two facts are very easy, these two properties. The first one says an equilateral triangle is equiangular. That means if all three sides are equal, that means all the angles are also equal. So that means angle A is congruent to angle B, which is also congruent to angle C. The reverse statement, the converse, is also true. An equiangular triangle is equilateral. That means if you have all three angles are being the same or congruent, that means all three sides are also the same or congruent. Well, with those two properties in mind, let's take a look at example 3. In example 3, it says if the measure of angle CBD is 130 degrees, what is the measure of angle BAD? Well, to start off, let's label measure of angle CBD is 130 degrees. So you find CBD. This whole thing right here is 130 degrees, okay? This whole thing. Now, let's take a look at the equilateral triangle. We're going to start off with that. Remember, if these three sides are the same, that means these three angles are the same. And at the same time, you also know that these three angles add up to 180 degrees. So what you're going to do is you're going to have 180 degrees equally split into three angles. And so 180 divided by 3 is 60 degrees. That means each angle is 60 degrees. Okay, so all these are 60. Now let's go back to this large angle CBD right here. If the whole thing is 130 and if this is 60, to find the remaining parts, we're going to use the angle addition postulates back in the previous chapter. Since you know that this is 130 degrees, and you know that this is 60 degrees, you do 130 minus 60, and you'll get 70 degrees for this particular angle ABD, okay? Now, you also learned that, well, in an isosceles triangle, right, if these two sides are the same, that means these two angles are also the same. And so what you do is you have 180 degrees, subtract 70, okay? And then whatever the remaining is, you divide it by 2. You equally split into these two angles. So you're going to do 180 subtract 70, and then your answer divided by 2, and you should get 55 degrees. That means this angle is 55 degrees, and this angle is also 55 degrees. Now let's go back to questions. What is the measure of angle BAD? Is this one right here. BAD is going to be 55 degrees, and that's your final answer. In the last example, let's take a look at this isosceles triangle. So first, there are two parts. The first part says find the height of the triangle. Well, the height is in the middle of the isosceles triangle, and it's perpendicular to the base of the isosceles triangle. Here we have the legs being 12 centimeters and the base being 16 centimeters. Now remember, I did say that the height is perpendicular to the base, so that means there's a right angle here. And since this is isosceles triangle and this is the height, that means I could split the base into half, so that means this is 8. Now I want you to take a look at this triangle that I shaded in red here. Well, this is a right triangle, and you have learned that to find the leg of a right triangle, we could use the Pythagorean theorem, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Remember, your c is across from the right angle, so this is going to be your c. And then your A is going to be your A or B, and then this is your H. So your H is, your A or B. So you have A squared plus B squared is equal to C squared. Well, your a is h, so h squared plus your b is h, so h squared is equal to 12 squared, okay? Well, let's actually solve the Pythagorean theorem. So you have x squared, which is 64, plus h squared is equal to 144. Well, to isolate the variable, you subtract 64 on both sides, like this. So that means h squared is equal to 144 minus 64, and you get 80. And to get rid of the square, the reverse operation would be square root. So we're going to take the square root on both sides. So h would be square root of 80. And to find what is that number, we're going to use a calculator to find what is square root of 80. So I'm going to put second, so square root of 80 here. And we're just going to round to 2 decimal places, which is 8.94. That means the height of the triangle is 8.94 centimeters. So that's the first part of example 4. The second part is, well, now you know that the height is 8.94, you're able to find the area of the triangle. Well, to find the area, recall that the formula to find the area of the triangle is A is equal to base times height divided by 2, or 1/2 times base times height. So we know that the base is 16, so we're going to substitute the capital B with 16. And then the height is the number that we just found in the first part, which is 8.94. And then at the end, once you multiply them, you divide by 2. So you do 16 times 8.94 and divided by 2. Let's do that. 16 times 8.94, whatever that answer is, divided by 2, and you'll get 71.52. So 71.52 square centimeters. We have to put a square just because we're talking about area this time. So it's going to be 2-dimensional. So therefore, your units is going to be centimeters square. Well, that's pretty much it for this lesson. The next couple minutes is to remind you how to log on to your Pearson's homework. Thank you. Hey everyone, so to get to your homework, first you go to my CNUSD website and then you click on the top of the page, my CNUSD, to log in. Well, you're going to type in your username and your password. Well, in this case, your student ID and your password. Then you go on to resource. I think for you guys it's resource. And then you go to a place called Pearson Savas Easy. Pearson Savas Easy. I'm not quite sure how you say that word, but it's Pearson Easy. Click on that. And you get to this pop-up page. And you're going to click on your class textbook. So you click on this right here. This is called Envision Integrated Mathematics 1 2009 Common Core. You click on that, a new window pop up again, and you see 3 different colors. The green color is your online textbooks. I teach from this textbooks. So if you don't have a copy, an actual copy, you could always go to here and click on the appropriate sections that we're teaching. But to find your online homework, you look at the reddish, orangish box in between, in the middle. It's called classes. So you're gonna click on here, click on classes, and depending on which period you're in, there will be new assignments here. So you're going to click on click into the assignments, and then do your homework, and then that's it. Well, inside the homework, there are problems for you to work on, which allow you 3 attempts before they give you the final answer. So for example, for this problem, if you accidentally got a wrong answer, it'll tell you keep trying. Then you type in another answer, and if it's wrong, then it'll give you one more chance. And the third time that you got it wrong, it'll tell you the answer right away. So, but you could always get help by viewing an example on this part of the feature. So it'll tell you what to do step by step, step by step, step by step until the final answer. So you could always refer to the question, help view an example, or you could use help me to solve this to actually work it step by step. So there will be more answer boxes for you to fill in, but at least it will help you on your learning. Now for this problem, what do you do when you get it wrong, right? So well, to get a point or to get scores on that homework, then you click on similar questions and you keep practicing until you get it right. So if I were to click on similar questions, you notice that the questions changed. It's different from the previous one. So let's say this time you got it right. Let's say x is equal to 5, right? Well, if you got it right, it will tell you well done, okay, and then you move on to the next problem. So we click on next to move on to the next problem, like this. And once you finish all the problem, I believe the next thing is for you to make sure that you answer all the questions. If there's anything that is not answered, make sure that you go back and look at it like this, right? So this is not answered. But let's say assume that if you finish your all of the questions on your homework, then you go to the bottom, I believe. Oh, actually, this button right here says submit my work. So you click on it and then boom, I only got 3% just because I only answered one question correct, the rest I did not answer. So in order for you to get at least 80% or any good scores, make sure that you answer every single question and it's correct, not incorrect, for you to get as many points as possible on your homework. If you have any questions, please contact me.